Lisheen by Frederick Cowles and read by Christopher Halton. And it is here, on the wild and ancient landscape of Cornwall, that our story begins. Frederick Cowles takes us back to a world in which the old beliefs have not entirely surrendered to the new, where an isolated parish, an ancient circle of stones and fragments preserved in the historical record, hint at events that perhaps were never meant to be remembered. At the heart of those events is a young clergyman, the Reverend John Pacey, and a child entrusted to his care under the strangest of circumstances. Her name is Lisheen. This is a rather different Cowles tale, part antiquarian mystery, part folk horror, with something of Arthur Machen in its suggestion that beneath the familiar Christian landscape of Britain, much older things may still endure. So with the fires burning upon the Cornish hills, we turn back the centuries and begin Frederick Cowles's Lisheen. Those who know the southwest corner of the Duchy of Cornwall, more especially those who have a taste for ecclesiastical archaeology, will remember with pleasure the lovely little 14th century church of St. Germain at Germalion. For many years this delightful building was sadly neglected and allowed to fall into a ruinous condition. The local people were quite indifferent to its decay, for they had little interest in religion. Successive vicars were men of little culture, and even if they had wished to repair the building, could not afford to tackle a job which would obviously prove far beyond their limited means. It is not unreasonable to suggest that for over 200 years the blight of ignorance and superstition depressed this village and turned its inhabitants into a strange secret community of people who seemed to have no youth. Then, about the middle of the last century, a change came over the place. The old generation apparently died out completely, and men and women from other places took possession of the dilapidated cottages. They brought with them a new spirit and the initiative to make Germalion the tidy village it is today. With the restoration of the Cornish diocese, in 1876 some attempt was made to repair the church, but only essential work was carried out as little money was available. In 1907 the Reverend John Wheatley was appointed to the living. He was a wealthy man and a learned antiquary, and he immediately set about the colossal task of a thorough restoration. Whilst careful to preserve all the original features of the church, he enriched it with fine screens, statues, and stained glass. Only master craftsmen were employed in the work, and as a result of their skilled efforts, the building is now as lovely as a page in a medieval missal. Visitors walk its aisles and admire all they see, excepting, of course, for those few perverted individuals who smell popery in a whiff of incense and see the influence of sinister Jesuits in every painted saint. A few old tombs remain, but none is particularly interesting. The font is late Norman and came from an earlier church, and there is a magnificent cape chest, which has been carefully repaired to hold the modern vestments. But the greatest treasure possessed by the church is the remarkable set of registers which go back to the year 1592. Antiquaries frequently consult these records, but so far as I know, they have never been transcribed. Some of the more humorous entries have been printed in guidebooks, but the strangest of them all seem to have been missed or deliberately avoided. Perhaps it has been considered policy to leave them alone, for they refer to an episode which is far from edifying. For example, under the date 31st October, 1603 can be read, "This day did I, John Pacey, essay to baptize ye child of Minifreda Penryn, deceased, but ye water steamed as it touched her brow. Yet will I save her soul, if this be possible. Buried ye body of Minifreda Penryn without rite or prayer, for well I know she hath already lost that which belongeth to God." For a matter of 17 years, the registers are in the same crabbed hand and contain nothing more exciting than the usual records of baptisms, marriages, and funerals. Then the writing changes with a very peculiar entry, dated 23rd June 1620. On this day did the Reverend John Pacey, vicar of this parish, vanish from the eyes of mortal men, taking with him that witch child called Lisheen, to whom he had long since given his soul. God grant that he come not again. Little is known for certain of the matter of this John Pacey, although legends of him are still whispered by Jamalian firesides on dark winter evenings when the wind howls in the chimneys. In the list of vicars he is given as serving the parish from 1603 until 1620. The Exeter diocesan records contain certain references to the man, and there is a full report into the strange affair of his disappearance. My interest in him was aroused in 1938, when I discovered by chance in the library of Stirk House in Sussex a small leather-bound volume which proved to be John Pacey's diary of his years at Jamalian. It probably came into the possession of the Cantels through a branch of the family which once owned property in Cornwall. Sir Borlis Cantell kindly permitted me to make a copy of the manuscript, and it was well that I did. In 1942, Stirk House received a direct hit from an enemy bomb, and the library, with all its contents, was destroyed. By a close study of all existing records and my copy of the diary, I have been able to reconstruct the curious story of the Reverend John Pacey, vicar of Jamalian, who lost his immortal soul for the sake of a witch child. On a day in mid-October 1603, John Pacey rode across the bleak moors beyond Penzance and entered the desolate region known as Jamalian Sands. The brooding silence might have depressed an older man, but Pacey was only 25 and journeying to take possession of his first parish. For the 2 years since his ordination he had been curate at Liskeard, and then the bishop, who was a relative by marriage, had offered him Jamalian. The prelate, in a valedictory letter, had hinted that certain difficulties might be encountered by the young man in his new ministry. This is clearly stated in the first entry in the diary, which, for the sake of convenience, I shall give in modern English. He begins with a brief description of the church and rectory, and was apparently well satisfied with both. He goes on, Sarah Treveras, who acted as housekeeper to my predecessor, has agreed to serve me in a like capacity. She is a motherly woman and had good fires blazing and a hot meal prepared for me. The village comprises but 100 or so poor cottages, and the people, what I have seen of them, are sullen and unfriendly. The place is encircled by sands which, so legend says, cover a lost city which was destroyed because of the wickedness of its inhabitants. Near at hand to the east is a circle of upright stones, which some claim to have been the temple of the lost city. A former vicar wrote much of this stone circle, which he asserted had a bad influence upon the folk of Jamalian. The bishop, in warning me of possible difficulties, stated that, in his opinion, many of the superstitions of popery linger in this locality, and that witches and warlocks abound. Now it would seem that soon after his arrival at Jamalian, on the 30th day of October to be exact, John Pacey was aroused in the night. There came to my door, he wrote, a tall black man who told me that one Minifreda Penryn was sick in childbed and like to die, and that I should hasten to her with all dispatch. He made his way to the village and to a cottage where a light shone in the window. There he found a young girl in bed with 2 old women in attendance. The baby had been safely delivered, and with muttered words the 2 crones left the house as soon as the parson arrived. Kneeling by the couch, he endeavoured to pray for the dying woman, but found himself unable to utter the usual prayers. He became conscious of the girl's regard, and her eyes held a queer mocking light. As he paused in his uncertainty, she spoke to him. "Parson," she said, Prayers can avail me naught, for I go to him who is my true lover, and for his dear sake I have given my soul to the old gods. Care for my child, and you will be rewarded in good time. Fail me in this, and I will wreak my vengeance upon you." "Who is this lover of whom you speak?" cried the dismayed clergyman. "Who is the father of your child?" A faraway look came into the woman's eyes as she replied, "He came to me in the stone circle which men call Bryn Glass, and his beauty is beyond all mortal loveliness. Soon he will come again to claim me as his bride for all eternity." The horrified man strove again to stammer the words of a prayer, but his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and no sound came from his lips. Then, as he knelt there, he heard a mighty wind arise and storm about the cottage. The door burst open, and there entered a naked youth, dazzling with an unearthly beauty. The stranger laid his hand for a moment on the head of the newborn babe, and then, lifting Minifreda Penrhyn in his arms, carried her out into the night. John Pacey saw this with his own eyes, and he also saw that a dead body lay on the bed, as if she who had been borne away had no further use for the habiliments of the flesh. A curious music of hellish sweetness filled his ears, and seizing the child, he fled from the house. Back in the rectory, he roused Sarah and bade her attend to the baby. This she was reluctant to do, and mumbled much of witchcraft and sorcery. But knowing in his heart the truth of her whispering, he urged the claims of Christian charity and helped to prepare a cot for the little stranger. It was a girl child, and as he bent over her, she opened her eyes. He looked into pools of deep green, like matchless emeralds, and saw in their depths things no mortal should behold. Yet in that moment he knew that, for good or ill, their destinies were linked, and that he must care for her and keep her under his roof. In the morning he carried the child to the church, intending to baptize her in the Christian faith and name her Mary. But his tongue refused to utter the sacred words, and the drops of water, as they touched the baby's brow, leapt away as if they had fallen upon a live coal. The parson, with a frantic effort, endeavoured to pronounce the formula, but not a word could he say. Then another voice, like a soft wind blowing from some secret place beyond the world, whispered the word Lisheen. Even then John Pacey was not warned, for the green eyes had captured his heart. He carried the child back to the house and took her for his own. Nor did he speak of his inability to administer the sacrament, and to Sarah Trevaras he said that the girl's name was now Lisheen. On the day of All Souls he bade the sexton dig a grave and to fetch the body of Minifreda Penrhyn for interment. All we know of this is the entry in the register, and from that it is apparent that the parson did not or could not carry out the rite of Christian burial. It is not recorded whether any relatives or friends gathered about that unhallowed grave to mourn the dead girl. If any such did attend, they were evidently well content that the vicar should have the care of the green-eyed child of Minifreda Penrhyn. The diary contains an entry for this day, but it does not refer to the burial. "After darkness has fallen," wrote John Pacey, "I did chance to look from my window, and did see a red blaze in the stone circle on the hill. Then came people hastening through the night. Some hurried on their 2 legs, but others rode on the air like great birds. All went to that place called Bryn Glass, and I saw their shadows dancing about the fire, and heard the music of pipes. As a Christian priest, I should have climbed to the temple and denounced their heathen rites, but God forgive me, I was afraid." Lisheen, for there was never any doubt about her name, grew in beauty as the years passed, and yet she must have been something of a disturbing influence in the vicar's home. Sarah Trevaras soon became attached to the child, and at the same time was a little afraid of her. The village accepted her and her position at the parsonage without question. As for the parson himself, he was wrapped up in the girl and completely under her spell. Yet from the day of her coming, the heart went out of his work, as if he knew that all his preaching was in vain. The few people who attended the services sat and listened to his discourses with impassive faces. But he soon knew that there was that in their eyes which savoured of half-amused toleration, as if he shared with them some secret which made all his professions of Christianity a hollow sham. At certain seasons in every year, on the days of the old pagan festivals, he saw the fires blaze in the stone circle and knew that strange and forbidden rites were carried out in the ancient temple. Yet he did nothing to turn the people from their evil ways. In fact, from some of the entries in the diary, it would seem that he was a little envious, and even then was prepared to share their secret worship. Lisheen's 6th birthday dawned, and before sunrise she slipped out of the house and climbed the hill called Bryn Glas. John Pacey, rising with the sun and looking from his window, saw the girl, mother naked, entering the circle of stones. With feverish haste he donned his clothes and hurried after her, calling her name. But she never looked back, and within a few yards of the temple he found he could advance no further. His feet were chained to the ground. What he witnessed is best told in his own words. "I saw Lisheen, white and beautiful, kneeling at the feet of a tall dark man who was half hidden in the shadows. I heard the whisper of strange music and smelt a scent as of rare flowers. How long I stood there I do not know, but suddenly the stranger was gone and I found myself able to enter the circle. Lisheen was still kneeling before a flat stone like an altar, and by it was a mark in the sand. It was the impression of a cloven hoof." Pacey escorted the child home and tried to question her as to the reason for visiting Bryn Glas. All she would say was that the time had come when she must know her own people. Soon he knew that on other occasions she climbed to the stone circle, and that when the fires glowed through the night, she danced to the music of the pipes. In his mad folly he did nothing to denounce such wickedness. The only thing that is clear from the rambling entries in the diary is that the girl possessed a wisdom and intelligence beyond her years, and the parson came to regard her almost as a companion of his own age. Some years after, during the inquiry arranged by the consistory court, it was asserted that about this time Pacey ceased to perform the offices of a Christian minister and gave himself entirely to the horned god. An attempt was made to prove that the services held in the church were but blasphemous travesties of religion, and that the Christian altar was used in the abominable rites of Satan. But the only witness brought forward by the accusing parties was a half-demented old woman whose wild statements could not be supported by more reliable people. The diary certainly makes no mention of anything of this nature, and as it is a frank document in every respect, it is unlikely that Pacey would have omitted to record such a vital change in his belief. In 1615, when Lisheen was 12 years of age, the Archdeacon of Padstow made a visitation of the parish. This dignitary must have given more than cursory attention to the affairs of the place, and yet he reported them as in correct order. He does, however, appear to have resented Lisheen and her presence in the parson's house, and to have corrected her for her seeming precociousness. But it was not until the inquiry of 1620 that he publicly suggested anything in the nature of witchcraft, and by then the episode may have been magnified in his mind. In his evidence he stated, "Having cause to reprimand this child, Lisheen, she turned upon me a baneful glance and pointed 2 fingers towards me. Immediately I was gripped with an agonizing pain, as of colic, which doubled me up and tortured my guts for upwards of an hour." It seems strange that, in an age when witch hunting was all the fashion, the worthy archdeacon kept this business to himself when he returned from his visitation, and did not think it worth recalling until another 5 years had gone by. Maybe he was influenced by a laudable desire to keep a fellow cleric free of any suspicion of association with the powers of darkness. Sarah Trevaris died in the March of 1618, and it is evident from the diary that Lisheen objected to another woman being brought into the house. She undertook to look after Pacey's creature comforts, and he seems to have been content with such an arrangement. From that time, a new note creeps into the diary. It is dominated by Lisheen. Although she was only 15, she was a woman in the eyes of the parson, and it is obvious that he was jealous of any who had access to her. He makes frequent mention of the Bringlass rites and expresses no proper horror of the pagan ceremonies in which Lisheen, with his full knowledge, regularly participated. There is only a bitter resentment that her body should be exposed for others to see, and that he should have no share in those sinful orgies. He writes more and more of her physical attractions, the magic of her eyes, her tempting lips, her graceful beauty. He tells of nights that were bitter with desire. Never once does he record any attempt to cure himself of this obsession, no effort to consult a fellow clergyman, nor is there any mention of prayer to the God he had vowed to serve. Occasionally he admits that he is afraid, but it is not fear of the divine wrath which causes him any anxiety, only the thought that Lisheen may leave him. We now come to the year 1620, which brings us to the crisis in this strange affair. The entries in the diary become almost incoherent, and it is not easy to follow the story of the final happenings. It would seem that Pacey was already driven almost mad by his desire for Lisheen, and that she was only able to restrain him by the promise of satisfaction in the near future. She promised more, for she vowed he should soon be admitted to the secrets of that worship, of which she was a votary. On an April evening he wandered up the hill and into the stone circle. Suddenly, he writes, one stood beside me, and I saw horns upon his head. And this demon said to me, that which you desire shall be yours, but first must you worship me as the Lord of the air. Then I knew that I could struggle no longer, and kneeling down I adored him, and he bade me come to the temple on May Eve. At the appointed time, John Pacey saw the fire blaze in the circle of Bringlass, and with his hand in that of Lisheen climbed the hill. There, if we are to believe the diary, he again did homage to the horned god and was initiated into the secret mysteries. In return, he was given Lisheen, but on condition that, when midsummer came, he should be prepared to follow her into the haunted halls of the lost city and know no more the ways of mortal men. In the fierce light of the fires, he wrote, I held her lovely body in my arms, and she gave herself to me. At last she became mine, and for her beauty I gave my soul. During those few weeks between May Day and Midsummer, no services were held in Jamalian Church, nor did the people of the village seem to expect their parson to officiate. John Pacey lived only for his Lisheen, and yet in the fulfilment of his desire he found no satisfaction, nothing more than a burning, all-consuming passion that could not be assuaged. One who came to the village about that time and afterwards testified before the consistory court said, the vicar appeared as a man in a dream. His eyes must for ever be following the witch-child, and he was unhappy were she out of his sight but for a moment. I never saw a man so utterly bewitched by the powers of darkness. Sometimes he was afraid, and then he would moan, such a little time, such a little time. Methinks that, if some godly man could have given him counsel in those days, he might still have saved his soul. With the approach of the appointed time, the parson seems to have lost all interest in life. He shut himself in the rectory with Lisheen, and never went abroad. At last the eve of midsummer came, and the fires of Bringlass blazed with a terrible brilliance, which was visible from Pendeen in the north and St. Leven in the south. The people of those places afterwards said it was a night of fierce storm, and that strange figures rode on the wind, as if hastening to some infernal sabbat. We have no details of what happened on that fatal night. All we know is that the Reverend John Pacey, with his arm around Lisheen, mounted the hill and entered the temple of the old gods. Neither he nor the witch-child were ever seen again in the flesh. The evidence brought before the court of inquiry makes interesting reading, and I have already quoted the more important testimonies. The learned divines spent many days in considering the case, and eventually the verdict of the court was recorded as follows. It is our unanimous opinion that John Pacey, vicar of Jamalian, was a warlock and unworthy of his sacred calling, that he did vow himself to the service of the master of evil, and did have carnal intercourse with the witch called Lisheen. Therefore, by his own act, he hath cut himself from the Christian communion, and, whether living or dead, let him be anathema. Modern archaeologists tell us that there is, in truth, a city buried beneath Jamalian sands, and that the date of the cataclysm which overwhelmed the place was not less than 1,000 years before the Christian era. These savants are of the opinion that Brynglas was a temple of that lost land, and that its position on the summit of a high hill saved it from being overwhelmed when the city disappeared. Sometimes when the winds of winter rage and their violence disturbs the sands, fragments of carved stones are revealed. But the spring storms soon move the sands again, and the relics are covered before they can be properly examined. Thus, nothing is really known of the sinful city which has become a legend of fear in that part of Cornwall. Often on the dark nights of November, when the candles gleam on the altars of Jamalian Church, and the vested priest chants the office of the dead, there comes a sad wailing, and a soft tapping on the windows of the sanctuary. The timid ones make the holy sign and dare not raise their eyes from their prayer books, but sometimes one, more daring than the others, looks towards a window in which there is no stained glass, and sees, pale against the cold panes, the face of a man who should have been dead long since, and behind his shoulder stands a girl of strange beauty whose green eyes shine with the lights of hell. The end. What I particularly like about this story is the way Cowles disguises something very old and very strange beneath the respectable surface of historical research. We begin with a church, parish records, and the writings of a long-dead clergyman, but gradually those documents open a door onto a much older world. There is certainly something of M.R. James in that method, the modern investigator uncovering an extraordinary episode through surviving records. But the deeper we travel into Lisheen, the more I'm reminded of Arthur Machen. Christianity may have claimed the landscape, but the stones were there first, and the beliefs surrounding them have not necessarily disappeared, simply because people cease to speak openly of them. Lisheen herself is what makes the story so unsettling. Cowles never allows her to become merely a conventional witch or supernatural villain. From the circumstances of her birth and that disturbing attempted baptism onwards, there is always the suggestion that she belongs to another order entirely, one connected with the ancient landscape and the rites performed among the stones. And poor John Pacey stands between those two worlds. He is a Christian clergyman, rational and dutiful, yet increasingly drawn into something his faith and education cannot adequately explain. His tragedy is perhaps that he believes he can protect Lisheen from that older world without recognizing how completely she belongs to it. I also rather like Cowles's use of the historical record. We know that something extraordinary happened, but centuries have reduced it to fragments. An unusual entry in a register, a missing clergyman, an old diary, and a story reconstructed long afterwards. That gives the tale the pleasing illusion that we have stumbled across an authentic mystery rather than simply been told a ghost story. And perhaps that is the lingering thought behind Lisheen. Landscapes remember. Religions change, churches rise, records are written, and generations pass away. But beneath all of that, something older may remain. The fires may have gone out upon the hill, but the stones are still there. I hope you enjoyed Lisheen. If you did, do let me know in the comments, particularly whether you would like me to continue exploring these lesser-known supernatural tales of Frederick Cowles. Until the next story, thank you for listening to Haunted Tales of Darkness.